Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I want to thank Bhai Avtar Singh for giving me this opportunity to take a trip down memory lane and recollect some really fond memories of Bhai Avtar Singh. One of my fondest memories of Bhai Avtar Singh were early weekday morning Asadivars in Chicagoland. This was in the homes of people, homes of Sangat, Sikhs from around Chicago. And because we all had to go to work, you had to get the Kirtan and the Asadivar program in early. We had to finish up by 8 o'clock. And so we were often starting at 5 a.m. During the years he came to Chicago, he would come for a week or so. And the weekends, of course, were commitments at the Gurdwara. But during the weekdays, very early in the morning, an intimate number of Sikhs would gather at Sikh homes around Chicago. And Bhai Sahib, Bhai Avtar Singh, Bhai Swaran Singh would sing Asadivar. We would turn the lights off often, and the sun hadn't yet risen. And it was just beautiful. Those were very intimate divans. And I recall I have never felt emotional intensity in kirtans, at least as much as I did, as I experienced during those divans. And I remember one thing that struck me was that in this darkness, they would often sing from memory. And I could tell they would get emotional too. Bhai Sahib, Bhai Avtar Singh, you can ask him of his experiences. But I wondered once, asking Bhai Swaran Singh, how do you remember all this Bani? Because he would often be the one prompting if a line from a Shabad was ever misremembered. And how do you remember so much Bani? And he said, it comes from a discipline of reading several pages of Sri Guru Granth Sahib every day. That was his answer. It wasn't some mystical, magical answer. It was just the discipline of daily practice. And so a lot of people know Bhai Avtar Singh as a great exponent of Gurmat Sangeet. And of course, he was that. But in my experience, I related to him beyond just Kirtan. His and my conversations obviously explored Bani, but we talked about history, the Rehat, challenges facing the Panth, his personal stories, even willingness to stand and fight when needed. These were all things that connected in him. It reflects, in my view, a very much fuller Sikh personality. I remember one of the Asadivars in Chicago, we asked the Jatha to take off their watches and put them in their pockets. At home, unlike at the Gurdwara, you could do that. You don't have to be governed by a slot in a program. And I remember that at least one Asadivar probably went nearly 4 hours. For us in Chicago, me and several friends, those kirtans were magical. Another side of him also comes through in the stories he would tell. One of the funniest stories that I can recall was in the days when he and his brother and Bhai Swaran Singh were young men traveling around Punjab to do kirtan. And I'm guessing this was in the 40s, 50s, or 60s. And I remember this one story they told me where they would take trains, and then from the train station they had to walk often several miles carrying their instruments. These days, the instruments are lighter, compact harmoniums and tablas. Back then, the jodi that Bhai Swaran Singh probably carried weighed well over 50 pounds. And they'd have to walk these long distances, often on unpaved, dusty roads, wearing white kurta pajamas. And, they had to make sure that the dust didn't ruin their clothes before they arrived at their programs. So what did they do? They would take off their pajamas, the bottoms, and walk in their kacheras with their instruments on their shoulders. And I still find that image hilarious. And what I remember actually, the way Pai Swaran Singh and Pai Saab told this story was their, belly busting laughter as they shared the story. Laughing out loud was a major part of my interactions with him. But the story also reveals another aspect of him and Pai Gurcharan Singh and Pai Swaran Singh, is that they were strong as young men. And not just as young men, carrying those kinds of instruments, walking so much. I remember when they were much older, Pai Gurcharan Singh was in his 90s, so you can calculate. And I remember coming to a program that was honoring them in Delhi. And, as you often do, I said, Ki hal hai Pai Saab? And they were all there. And they said, Takde hain? And maybe Pai Gurcharan Singh, I think it was Pai Gurcharan Singh, looked at the the expression in my face suggested, well, you're 90. And he turned his pectoral muscles up to me. He says, Hatta la ke dekh. And I poked his pecs, and in his 90s, they were rock solid. If you carry instruments and you walk, and I don't know what else they must have done for physical fitness. They were tough. Not, you think of, and not just think of, I meet Kirtaniyas, and they're often delicate and soft and overweight, big paunches, even though Guru Nanak, I think there's a clear line from Guru Nanak about Khai Vadaya Pet. But these guys, at least in their youth, were tough. There was Bani, there was sweetness and spirituality, there was speedy, but there was also meaty and toughness. I can't share one of their stories, but in their youth, I know they got into a massive confrontation that was, I'll leave it at that where they were Kharkus. And that reminds me, he also told me about his interactions with Sanjarnail Singh Pindramwale. And those conversations were both fascinating and edifying to all of us. What I took from them was not just our history, our modern history. It was that Paisa was willing to have difficult conversations, yes, about spiritual matters, but also about political ones. He was not one of those who wanted to reduce Sikhi to some narrow, as you see right now, as I often see Sikhs talking about one aspect of Sikhi only. I call it the spiritual industrial complex. Oneness is the only thing that you hear them talking about, not the larger Sikh frame that we live in. And amongst those stories, some were very practical. He told me about doing kirtan with his dad, Bhai Avtar Singh. In rural Punjab, in places where the spread of Sikhi was still limited, Anand Karaj was not a commonly accepted practice. In some places, marriages were still performed by Brahmins, and the Anand Karaj was seen as a threat, not only religiously speaking, but also economically, because it disrupted old structures. Income was being impacted. And one of the stories, anecdotes, he told me still brings a smile. Someone at some event who was, the bride's father, or the bride-to-be's father, was told that don't do an Anand Karaj. Because if the couple walks around the Guru Granth Sahib, they're effectively marrying the bride off to the Granthi who is sitting, Tabedar Granthi jade baithe ne. And that became an issue at that event. And so in that particular Anand Karaj, every time the Lama were sung, the Granthi would get up and take a couple of steps backwards so that when the couple circled, the Granthi would be outside the circle. It's a funny story, but it also reminds us that, the Sikh tradition, at least practicing it in its complete form, not aspects of it as I often see us doing, all aspects of it. They were lived struggles. There was resistance, there was opposition, sometimes there was real hostility. I think I vaguely remember a story about death threats and even an attempt on Bhai Jawala Singh's life by Brahmins who were not happy. So this struggle against Brahmanism is something that continues till today, and Bhai Sahib and his lineage have reckoned with it. On a more serious note, he was also very candid about the life of a kirtaniya in the Sikh tradition. More than once, he told me that being a kirtaniya in our tradition required a great deal of tolerance, not just nimrata, but tolerance for being humiliated. There's a difference between being humble and tolerating humiliation. And I mean, he didn't use those words, but I've seen that how Gurdwara committees and prabandhaks, not all, but many, often treat our kirtaniyas and our granthis, speaking down to them, acting as if they're above them, arrogance, which arguably Home is the central challenge for our tradition. Once in Chicago, in the early days when he came, I think this is before Bhai Avtar Singh joined the Jatha. I went to see him, and he was in a basement. This is our Gurdwara was still in its early stages, and we didn't have great facilities, and I think he was staying in a basement. And I just remember going, I wouldn't stay here. And I remember calling Dr. Daljit Singh, who had also a very affectionate relationship with Bhai Sahib, said, just bring him over. And he stayed, Bhai Sahib and Bhai Avtar Singh later on. The Jatha stayed with him every time they visited, or most times they visited. So I remember him also telling me that, these younger, in his own family, that, it's going to be hard for them to be kirtaniyas of the Sikh tradition, because they will have to tolerate bahut kuch jarna pehna hai innan nu. Another thing that stayed with me, and this was probably one of my disagreements I had with him, he had a habit of praising people publicly at the end of kirtan. Prabandhaks, committee members, members of the Sangat, and sometimes to my discomfort, even me. I just don't like being called out. And he would say things that were way beyond what I earned and what I deserve. And I remember going to him and I say, I know your affection. You don't need to say things, at least not about me, publicly. And he laughed it off, ignoring me. And he said, this is nothing. He told me about the story that in earlier times, kirtaniyas would stop kirtan midway when someone important came with a donation and start praising them midstream in the middle of the kirtan. He said that his father and they never did this, but even they would record the names of people who have come up and acknowledge them at the end. Anyway, I found that both amusing and revealing. He was a living memory. He was rooted in the old world, and then, of course, did kirtan in the new world. I'll share my final memory. I'll end with one of my final memory of him, which was on the last day of his life. I remember going to see him. He was in his bedroom, and his abdomen was disgorged with probably fluid. I think Kalra uncle, Dr. Kalra, who was his physician, was managing his pain, but he was nevertheless obviously in discomfort. And it was clear that this was a hospice situation, and it was a matter of days, if not hours, before he would pass. And I remember asking him, as I often did, Kirtan Bhai Sahib? And his answer, he had this way of shaking his head when he when he would make some comments, and he goes, Jardi Kala. And that has stayed with me. How, Sikhs, death isn't something we fear. It's not just something from history, something that we live. In the face of the end, he did not capitulate. So I think many people will rightly remember Bhai Avtar Singh for his immense contribution to Gurmat Sangeet, Gurbani Kirtan. They should. But I also hope we remember something beyond that. In my experience, it was humor, memory, honesty, disagreement. It was the fuller ideal of a Sikh. I'm sure he wasn't perfect. I'll leave that to Bhai Avtar Singh and family to share. But what I saw of him was extraordinary. And I think this is why his presence has stayed not just with me, but with many of my friends and many in my Sangat. Again, thank you for this opportunity. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.